I was 20. That weird age when you think you know what love is, but really, you're just learning how blind it can make you. He wasn't a bad man all the time. That's the thing that messes with your head. He could be charming, funny, even tender in moments that felt too rare to be real. But the bad nights, they lingered longer, especially when alcohol was involved. He had this habit, no, this need, to remind me who he thought I was whenever he drank. He'd toss around words like bitch, crazy, or dramatic, as if saying them made him the sane one. I'd sit there, half shrinking, half boiling inside, wondering why I always let the words pass through me instead of back at him. The first few times, I cried. The next few, I tried to fight back, but eventually, I learned something quieter. Sometimes the most dangerous revenge doesn't come with yelling. It comes with silence and a plan. He loved his PlayStation more than anything. That thing was his escape, his sanctuary, his best friend. After work, after drinks, after fights, he'd sink into that glowing screen and vanish for hours. It was easier for him to argue with strangers online than to face me sitting on the same couch. One night while he played, I was scrolling through my phone, half bored, half bitter, and I noticed something. His PlayStation was showing up on my Wi-Fi app, the kind that lets you see which devices are connected. And then it hit me. I could control it, not just see it, disconnect it. The idea started as a spark, a small wicked one that I brushed off at first. I told myself I wouldn't stoop low. But then, another night came, and another name slipped from his mouth. "You're such a bitch when you get like this," he said, eyes never leaving his game. It wasn't even a fight that time. It was casual cruelty, the kind that doesn't come with yelling, the kind that comes from comfort, from knowing he could say it, and I'd stay quiet. That's when the spark turned into a plan. The next evening, while he was playing some war game with his friends, I opened the Wi-Fi app again. There it was, Pier 5, connected, active, steady. My thumb hovered over the disconnect button, my heart pounding like I was about to commit a crime. It wasn't revenge, not really. It was balance, justice, in the tiniest, pettiest form. I tapped the button. The green light turned grey. The sound of his game cut off mid-sentence. He frowned, muttered something, and started troubleshooting. "What the hell?" he said, staring at the router. I sat quietly, pretending to scroll through my phone. He restarted the router. The internet was fine. His phone was still connected. He even looked at me and asked, "Did you lose Wi-Fi?" I looked up, blinked innocently, and said, "Nope, maybe it's your console." He grumbled and restarted his PlayStation. While it powered back up, I turned the connection on again. It reconnected smoothly. The problem vanished. He relaxed, started his game again, joined a new match. His friends' voices filled the room through his headset. "Dude, you back?" they asked. He laughed. "Yeah, my Wi-Fi's acting up." I waited, watched, counted to 30. Then I did it again. Disconnected. The silence that followed was pure satisfaction. He groaned louder this time. "What the hell is wrong with this thing?" he said, yanking his headset off. I bit my lip to stop from smiling. That night, I didn't go to sleep angry. I didn't go to sleep sad. For the first time in a long time, I went to sleep satisfied. It wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about control. About taking back the smallest piece of power that he chipped away from me every time he opened his mouth in after a drink. But that first night was just the beginning. The next week, it happened again. Mysteriously. He'd be mid-match, shouting orders at his teammates. And suddenly, the connection would drop. His friends would tease him. "Bro, fix your internet!" And he'd start swearing at the router again. I'd just sit there, sipping my tea, acting like I couldn't possibly understand what was wrong. He tried everything. Changed the router settings, moved the console, even called the internet company once. Nothing helped. Every few days, like clockwork, the disconnects came back. Always random, always unexplained. It became a running joke with his friends. "Man, your house must be cursed." He'd laugh, but I could see the irritation in his eyes. He hated not being in control, hated when something didn't bow to him. And that's exactly why it was so satisfying. Behind every small act of pettiness, there was something deeper, a quiet rebellion. For every insult I swallowed, I gave back a little chaos. Not enough to destroy anything, just enough to remind myself that I wasn't powerless. People think revenge has to be loud, that it has to be big, dramatic, or final. But the best kind, the kind that lingers, is the one that feels like a whisper, a tiny inconvenience that eats away at their comfort, the same way their words once ate at you. And he had no idea. He'd sit there night after night, thinking the universe was messing with his PlayStation. I'd glance up from my phone sometimes, pretending to care. Maybe it's overheating, or did you update the system? Knowing damn well I was the reason behind every connection lost message. What made it even sweeter was that he trusted me completely in this. He'd even ask for my help. "You're good with tech," he'd say. "Can you see if something's wrong?" I'd nod. Open the same app that was causing his misery. Pretend to check something, then shrug. "Looks fine to me." It became our little ritual. His frustration, my feigned concern, and that delicious feeling of secret satisfaction humming under my calm expression. By the time I stopped doing it, I didn't feel petty anymore. I felt free. It wasn't about punishing him. It was about reminding myself that I could still make choices, that I still had a say, even if it was a small, invisible one. And though I never told him, a part of me knows that even now, somewhere deep down, he probably still wonders why those random disconnects happened. Maybe he blames the console, maybe the Wi-Fi, maybe fate. But I know the truth, and honestly, that's enough. After the first few times, it became more than just a little act of revenge. It turned into something I looked forward to, not out of spite, though I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a hint of it, but because it made me feel alive again. I had spent so long walking on eggshells around him that even pressing that one button felt like rebellion. It was small, silent, and perfectly controlled, something he couldn't touch, break, or blame on me. Every relationship has turning points. Some are loud, screaming matches, broken glass, slammed doors. Others are quiet, a click of a button, a smirk you hide behind your phone. For me, the quiet kind hurt less and healed more. He didn't notice my small smiles at first. He was too busy shouting at his console or complaining to his friends. The first week, I watched him with curiosity. How he'd frown, sigh, swear, and then dive into fixing things. I memorized his rhythm. It became like a dance. He'd get angry, and I'd pretend to be patient. He'd restart the console, and I'd turn the Wi-Fi back on just in time. The perfect illusion. But as the days passed, something changed. The more I watched him, the more I realized how predictable he was. His anger wasn't special. It was just habit. He got mad when things didn't go his way, whether it was a game, a drink, or me. He was the kind of man who thought control meant power, and losing it, even to a glitch, drove him insane. That realization gave me power in a way I didn't expect. One night, he was halfway through a loud argument with someone online. His voice filled the room, that sharp, irritated tone that made my stomach twist. It wasn't directed at me this time, but it still carried the same venom. The kind of tone that reminded me of every bad night before. I sat there, cross-legged on the couch, pretending to read something on my phone. My thumb hovered over the button again. I didn't press it immediately. I waited, listened, let the noise fill the room. His frustration, his arrogance, his laughter that never reached his eyes anymore. And then I pressed it. The silence that followed was almost sacred. He froze. What the hell? His voice broke mid-sentence. I bit the inside of my cheek to hide the smile tugging at my lips. He threw his headset onto the table, stared at the screen, then looked at the router again. I watched the scene play out like deja vu. He reset the router, checked the phone, restarted the console, and just like before, I let it reconnect right when he was about to give up. It became our secret rhythm. He'd break something invisible, and I'd fix it invisibly. I don't think he ever realized how poetic that was. But underneath that mischief, something deeper started forming in me. Something sadder, more real. Because every time I watched him struggle with that small bit of inconvenience, I wondered why I'd let him cause so much bigger chaos in me. Why did I stay? Why did I keep forgiving him? Why was I so afraid to leave a man who couldn't even handle a few minutes without internet? That's when I started noticing other things. How he only ever apologized when he needed something. How he'd joke about me being too sensitive. How he could ruin my mood with one careless sentence and then act. Confused when I grew quiet, so every petty disconnect became a mirror. A reflection of how he treated me. Each click reminded me that maybe, deep down, he deserved every ounce of frustration he felt. And the funny thing is, he started to believe his PlayStation was cursed. One evening, he was on a call with his friends, explaining how the connection would drop randomly. "I swear, man, I think my console's dying," he said. "It's like possessed or something." I was sitting right beside him, pretending to scroll through recipes. I almost laughed out loud. Possessed? Yes. By me. His friends suggested everything. Resetting DNS, clearing cache, replacing cables. He followed all their advice. None of it helped. The disconnects came back, perfectly timed, like I had a sixth sense for his most frustrating moments. Started enjoying the details. The pattern, the timing. I'd wait for his voice to rise, for the mockery to start, and then, click, gone, silence. His face would twist in disbelief, confusion, irritation, and I'd just sit there, expression calm, pretending to be completely unaware of his tiny unraveling. But as satisfying as it was, I started realizing something about myself too. It wasn't really about making him miserable anymore. It was about taking back control. The kind he took from me so often, without even realizing it. I was rebuilding a sense of power, even if it came in tiny, invisible doses. That's what people never talk about when they mention toxic relationships. They talk about the fights, the yelling, the cheating, the heartbreak, but they rarely talk about the quiet survival tactics. The ways you keep your sanity when you can't leave yet, when you're still pretending everything's fine. For some people, it's journaling. For me, it was a Wi-Fi app, and honestly, it worked. Every disconnected notification on his screen was a whisper to myself. You're not helpless. You can still choose. I started smiling again, not at him, but at myself. At the absurdity of it all, at how something so small could bring me back pieces of the confidence he'd chipped away. He noticed the change in me eventually. He couldn't name it, but he felt it. "You're acting weird lately," he said one night, looking at me suspiciously. I shrugged. "Maybe I'm just tired." He nodded, but I could see he didn't believe me. And maybe, deep down, he was right. I wasn't tired. I was changing. Quietly, carefully, one click at a time. The disconnects continued for weeks. He started talking less during his games, more focused, more anxious. I could tell he was trying to beat whatever was haunting his console. It almost became funny how determined he was to fix something he didn't even understand. I started to think of it as a kind of therapy, petty therapy. No shouting, no revenge plots, just small poetic justice that didn't hurt anyone but made me feel alive again. And the best part? He never suspected a thing. Sometimes I'd glance at him, struggling with his game, muttering to himself. And I'd think, you taught me how to live with chaos. Now I'm teaching you how it feels. By the time the disconnects stopped meaning anything to him, they'd already changed everything for me. I wasn't scared of his moods anymore. I wasn't waiting for his next insult. Because now I had something he didn't. Patience, control, and the sweetest secret in the world. By the third week, my little game had evolved into something almost artful. I knew his patterns. When he played, when he bragged, when his mood soured into that familiar, venomous tone that turned our small apartment into a cage. I could sense it before he even picked up the controller. It became almost ritualistic. He'd pour himself a drink, sink into the couch, and put on his headset. The glow of the TV washed over his face, softening the sharpness that usually made me shrink inside myself. But I'd learned something by then. The gentleness of light doesn't erase the damage done in the dark. "Ready up, man," one of his friends shouted through the headset. Yeah. "Let's win this one," he said, already half distracted. His confidence was always loudest when he was playing. That's when he felt untouchable, and that's exactly when I'd press the button. Click, his voice froze mid-sentence. Then came that beautiful moment of silence. The kind that wasn't peaceful, but charged. I waited for the usual. The confusion, the irritation, the loud sigh. But that night, something new happened. He didn't speak right away. He just stared at the screen, unmoving, his brows furrowed. Then he muttered under his breath, "No way, not again." He stood up, checked the router, then his phone. I stayed on the couch, feigning disinterest, scrolling through my feed as if I wasn't silently conducting his chaos. "It's fine on my phone," he said, his voice louder now. "Why does this only happen when I'm online with them?" I looked up slowly, pretending to think, maybe the PlayStation server? He frowned. "No, that doesn't make sense. It's just me." He reset everything again. Same routine, same hope. I reconnected the Wi-Fi, just in time for the boot up. He relaxed, convinced the worst was over, until I did it again. The second disconnect came right as his match started. "You've got to be kidding me," he yelled, throwing his controller onto the couch. I sipped my tea and said softly, "Maybe it's overheating." He glared at me. "It's not overheating. Something's wrong with this damn internet?" I shrugged, eyes never leaving my phone. "You could try calling the company tomorrow." He mumbled something under his breath, words I didn't catch. Or maybe I didn't want to. I'd learned that with him. Silence was sometimes safer than clarity. But inside, I was smiling. Not because I enjoyed watching him frustrated, because for once, he was the one questioning himself. For once, it wasn't me being gaslit, blamed, or doubted. It was him, alone in the maze he used to build for me. Over the next few days, the disconnects continued. Sometimes I did it twice in one night. Sometimes I'd skip a day or two. I wanted it to feel random, unpredictable, just like his moods had always been. His friends noticed too. One night, I overheard one of them through his headset. "Bro, your connection keeps dropping. You sure your Wi-Fi's okay?" "I don't know, man," he said. "Everything else works fine. Just the console. Maybe it's your router." Nah, I changed the cable. Reset everything. "It's just cursed. Cursed." The word made me laugh quietly. Maybe, in a way, it was. Not by spirits, but by karma. My quiet, smiling version of it. But what truly made me laugh, inwardly, of course, was watching how far he'd go to solve something that didn't need solving. He'd spend hours researching, adjusting settings, switching routers, calling his internet provider. And every time he thought he'd fixed it, I'd wait until he relaxed, until his guard dropped. Then, click, the look of disbelief on his face never got old. But what surprised me most was how this small secret started changing me. I didn't feel petty anymore. I felt calm, almost meditative, like I was slowly reclaiming pieces of myself. Not through anger, but through quiet control. He began talking less to me during his gaming hours. His temper, once explosive, had turned into brooding silence. He didn't understand why the world, or his console, seemed to be turning against him. I remember one night in particular. It was late. The air was heavy with the smell of whiskey and frustration. He sat in front of the TV, running yet another system update. I was lying on the couch, half asleep, when I heard him whisper to himself, "I swear something's wrong with this house." I opened my eyes and just watched him. He looked tired, older somehow. Maybe that's what guilt does. Even when it's not named, it still shows up in the lines of your face. He caught me staring and asked, "What?" "Nothing," I said softly. "You just look tired." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Yeah, maybe I am." There was a strange peace in that moment. Not forgiveness, not connection, just silence. A fragile temporary truce, built on exhaustion. But even then, part of me couldn't resist. After he went back into his match, talking to his friends again, laughing like the last few minutes hadn't happened, I pressed it one more time, disconnected. His laughter stopped, his friends' voices cut out, and for the briefest moment, our entire apartment fell quiet again. The kind of quiet I'd started to crave. I looked at him and saw confusion turn into anger, then disbelief, then weary surrender. He didn't even bother restarting this time. He just sat there, staring at the blank screen, shaking his head, and I realized something profound then. The disconnects weren't just happening to his console. They were happening between us two. The more I took away his control, the more distance grew. And strangely, I didn't feel guilty. It felt like nature was correcting itself. He'd always been the storm. Unpredictable, loud, destructive. And me? I'd learned how to be the quiet kind of lightning. That night, he finally muttered something that stayed with me for a long time. "I swear this PlayStation hates me." I smiled faintly. Maybe it's just tired of being yelled at. He looked at me for a long second, trying to figure out if I was joking. I was, and I wasn't. He laughed awkwardly, shaking his head, and said, "Yeah, maybe. But I think, in that tiny moment, some part of him wondered. Maybe not consciously, maybe not enough to accuse, but the seed of doubt was there. And that, to me, was better than any confession or victory. Because for the first time, he was the one who didn't trust his reality. The way I hadn't trusted mine for so long. There's a strange kind of power in silence. The kind that creeps in slowly, fills the spaces that used to echo with shouting. That's what my apartment felt like now. Not peaceful exactly, but quieter. The chaos had shifted, like smoke after a fire. He didn't yell as much anymore. Maybe because he was too busy trying to figure out why his PlayStation hated him. Or maybe he just sensed something had changed in me. I wasn't reacting like I used to. I wasn't flinching at every raised tone or bracing for the next insult. I had learned how to disappear. Not physically, but emotionally. The disconnects had become part of the rhythm of our lives now. He'd play, I'd wait, then at just the right moment, click. A whisper of rebellion in the dark. It was delicate work. Not too often, not too predictable. Like watering a plant of chaos, just enough to keep it alive. Some nights, I'd do it only once, just to watch the small crack of irritation cross his face. Other nights, I'd time it to his laughter. That hollow sound he made when he was trying too hard to prove he was fine. I'd wait for him to smile, lean back, relax. And then disconnected. The thing is, I didn't do it out of cruelty anymore. I did it to remind myself that I could still choose something. That in a life where I'd lost so much control, I could still decide when the lights blinked, when the silence returned. It was therapy in the shape of irony. But what surprised me was how his own behavior started to shift. He was still himself, moody, defensive, loud, but cracks were showing. He'd sit in front of the TV longer before turning it on, hesitate before joining his friends online. He began testing the Wi-Fi before every game, like someone checking for monsters under the bed. Once, I walked into the living room to find him talking to himself. "It can't be the internet," he muttered, pacing. "It's perfect when I'm on my phone. What is this?" He looked genuinely lost, and for a brief second, guilt flickered inside me. A small inconvenient spark of empathy. Then I remembered all the nights he'd slurred insults across the room, how I'd cried quietly while he slept peacefully next to me, and the guilt faded like smoke. You see, guilt is funny. It only sticks if you believe you're the villain. And I didn't. Not anymore. One Friday night, his friends were having some kind of online tournament. He'd been talking about it all week, hyped, almost boyish in his excitement. I could have let him have that night. I could have kept my thumb off the button. But then he said something over dinner that changed my mind. He was joking with a friend on the phone, laughing, and I overheard him say, "Yeah, she's around somewhere, probably doing nothing as usual." That word, nothing, hit harder than I expected. He'd said worse before, but somehow, that one stung more. It wasn't angry. It was dismissive. Like I was a piece of furniture in his life. Background noise. So that night, when he powered up his console and joined the game, I made my decision. He'd loaded into the match, laughing, joking, confident. The first round started perfectly. I watched him lean forward, completely focused, the glow from the screen painting his face. His friends' voices echoed through the headset. "Let's go, let's go!" And just when it started getting intense, click, the screen froze. "Wait, no," he shouted, slamming the controller down. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." I stayed silent, sitting on the edge of the couch with my book. "Did the Wi-Fi go out?" he asked, looking at me. I looked up, calm as ever. "No, mine's fine." He opened his phone, saw it was connected, and groaned. Every damn time. He got up, reset the router again, waited, sat back down. The match was lost. His friends teased him, laughing in his headset. "Bro, what's up with your connection?" He didn't laugh. His hands were trembling slightly. I saw it. He didn't notice I saw it. That night, I didn't feel victorious. I felt something quieter, like I'd crossed a bridge and couldn't go back. Because now it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about detachment. The act had stopped being about him and started being about me. For the first time, I saw how fragile he was beneath the noise. The man who'd once seemed larger than life now looked small, angry at ghosts, and I realized maybe that's all bullies really are. People haunted by their own emptiness. Over the next few days, he barely touched the console. I noticed him avoiding it, choosing his phone instead, scrolling endlessly like a man afraid of sitting alone with his thoughts. Sometimes I wondered if he sensed it, if deep down, his gut whispered that I had something to do with it. But he never asked. Maybe because he couldn't imagine me being capable of it. Maybe because he didn't want to believe the quiet girl he used to talk down to could outsmart him so easily. That assumption, that blindness, was my favorite part of all. I remember one evening when he sat on the floor, back against the couch, just staring at the console. "You think it's stupid," he said suddenly. "What?" "This." He gestured to the PlayStation. "I know you think it's dumb how much time I spend on it." I didn't answer right away. The truth sat heavy in my mouth. "I don't think it's dumb," I said finally. "I just think it's an escape." He nodded, not looking at me. "Yeah, maybe." We sat in silence for a while. Then he said quietly, "Feels like it's punishing me lately." I wanted to laugh. "If only you knew." Instead, I said, "Maybe it's just tired." He smirked faintly, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Tired, huh?" "Yeah," I said. "Everything stops working when it's overused." He looked at me then. Really looked. For a heartbeat, I wondered if he could see through me, if he could sense the truth hiding behind my calm expression. But then he looked away, exhaled, and said nothing. That night, he didn't play again. He turned off the TV and went to bed early. And I sat there in the dark, watching the blinking lights of the router, the soft hum of quiet in the room, and I realized I didn't need to disconnect him anymore. He was already disconnected, not from the internet, from me, from himself, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the broken one. I didn't feel small or helpless. I just felt done. The revenge had done its job, not by breaking him, but by reminding me that I could still reclaim something. My stillness, my strength, my sense of humor even, and maybe, in some twisted way, that was all I ever needed. By the next week, something in the air had changed. He still came home at the same time, still dropped his keys on the same table, still opened the fridge like he was looking for something that wasn't food, but the energy was different, lighter in some places, heavier in others. The arguments had stopped. The insults had dried up, but not because things were better. Just because there was nothing left to say. That's the thing people never tell you about toxic relationships. Sometimes they don't end in explosions. Sometimes they end in silence. The slow, steady fade out of two people who've run out of ways to hurt each other. He still played his game sometimes, but half-heartedly. There were no more tournaments, no more laughter echoing from his headset. Just him, sitting in the blue glow of the screen. Eyes glazed, fingers moving out of habit more than joy. And me? I'd stopped my little acts of mischief. The Wi-Fi stayed on. My phone stayed untouched. It wasn't that I didn't want to mess with him anymore. It's that I didn't need to. Somewhere along the line, the game had changed. I wasn't trying to get even anymore. I was trying to get out. Not physically, not yet. But mentally, emotionally, I'd already left. One evening, I came home to find him sitting at the table, staring at his controller. The TV was off. The apartment was unusually quiet. "You okay?" I asked, out of politeness more than concern. He didn't look up. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "Just tired." "Of work?" He hesitated, then said, "Of everything, maybe." I nodded, pretending to understand. But I didn't, not really, because tired was something I'd lived with for months. Years maybe, long before he ever said the word out loud. He was only just discovering it. I had already made peace with it. He looked around the apartment, at the couch, the table, the console, the empty takeout boxes. Then, almost under his breath, he said, "It used to feel different here." I didn't answer. He wasn't wrong though. The space that once buzzed with noise, arguments, TV, sarcasm, apologies that never really meant anything, was now hollow. He finally looked at me. "You don't even fight back anymore." I met his eyes. "Because there's nothing to fight for." He blinked. For once, he didn't have a comeback. And that silence, that stunned, empty silence, felt more satisfying than any argument ever could. That night, he didn't play. He didn't drink either. He just sat there, scrolling through his phone, restless. Meanwhile, I made tea, sat by the window, and watched the city lights blink. It was strange how peaceful I felt. Not happy exactly, but clear. Like the fog in my head had finally lifted. When you spend enough time around someone who tries to make you small, you start to forget the sound of your own thoughts. And then one day, you hear them again, and it feels like waking up after years of sleeping with the lights on. 2 days later, I caught him fiddling with the router again. He crouched down, tracing the cables, like he was trying to solve a mystery. "It's fine," I said without looking up from my book. "I know," he muttered. "Just checking. You haven't played in days." "Yeah," he said. "Guess I lost the mood." I smiled slightly. "Maybe it's time you found a new hobby." He glanced at me. "Like what?" "Something that doesn't depend on a signal." He chuckled once, bitter but real. "You sound like my mother." Maybe she was right about something. He didn't reply. He just went quiet again. That was the rhythm now. Short bursts of small talk, followed by long silences. Two people living side by side, not together, the kind of coexistence that feels more like a waiting room than a home. Weeks passed. He stopped asking what was wrong with the internet. He stopped trying to fix things. And slowly, the silence that used to make me anxious started to feel comfortable. It was mine now. One evening, while cleaning, I came across his old headset under the couch. The mic wire was tangled, the foam on the earpiece half torn. I held it for a moment, then placed it on the table. He noticed it later that night. "You found it," he said softly. "Yeah." He stared at it for a while. "Funny, huh? I used to spend half my nights talking through that thing." I nodded. "You still could. You just don't want to." "Or maybe," he said, "no one's listening anymore." The words hung between us. Heavy, final. I didn't say it out loud, but I thought it. Now you know how I felt. The next morning, he left early for work. I stood in the doorway after he left, looking around the apartment, the couch, the router, the quiet hum of the refrigerator. It all looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. I opened my phone, clicked on the Wi-Fi settings, saw his PlayStation still listed as a connected device. For a second, I hovered over the "forget this network" option. It was symbolic, really. One tiny act of digital finality, then I did it. Tap. The PlayStation disappeared from the list. And with that, the last connection, real or otherwise, was gone. When he came home that night, I was packing a small bag. He looked confused. "Where are you going?" "To my sister's. Just for a while." He nodded slowly, eyes scanning my face for something. Anger, guilt, softness. But there was none. Just calm. "Is this because of me?" he asked finally. I zipped the bag shut. "No," I said gently. "It's because of me." He stood there, hands in his pockets, saying nothing. Maybe he knew there was no fixing it. Maybe he didn't care enough to try. Either way, it didn't matter. As I walked to the door, I glanced once at the console on the floor, the controller resting beside it, the little light on the router still blinking steadily. He followed my gaze and said, almost quietly, "Guess the Wi-Fi's fine now." I smiled faintly. "Yeah," I said. "Perfect connection." Then I left. Outside, the air was cool, clean, the kind that fills your lungs differently when you're finally free. I walked down the street without looking back, my phone in my hand, the world open again at the tap of a screen. And for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't need to disconnect anything or anyone, because I was already connected to myself. Freedom doesn't feel the way movies make it look. It doesn't come with fireworks or dramatic music or a slow-motion walk into the sunset. It comes quietly, like the steady rhythm of your own breathing when no one's watching you anymore. The first few nights at my sister's place was strange. Her house was smaller, cluttered, full of life and laughter that didn't belong to me. The walls carried the noise of her kids playing, the TV humming, the smell of burnt toast in the morning. It wasn't peaceful, not exactly, but it was safe. I slept on a couch that creaked whenever I turned, but for the first time in months, I slept deeply. No arguments in the next room. No controller clicks at 2 a.m. No half-drunken mumbling from the living room. Just silence. The real kind. In the mornings, I'd sit by the window with a cup of coffee and watch the sun spill over the rooftops. It was ridiculous how beautiful something so ordinary could feel. I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd lost in trying to manage someone else's chaos. At first, I caught myself checking my phone too often, expecting a message from him, maybe something angry or guilt-ridden. But it never came, and with each day that passed, I stopped waiting for it. He didn't call. He didn't text. Not once. It was like he'd simply erased me. Or maybe, for the first time, respected the silence I'd always wanted. Either way, it was fine, because this time, the silence belonged to me. One afternoon, my sister's husband was setting up their Wi-Fi for a new tablet. He asked if I wanted to connect my phone to their network. I laughed before I could stop myself. "What's funny?" he asked. "Nothing," I said, smiling. "Just, Wi-Fi used to mean something else." He looked at me weirdly, but I didn't explain. How could I? How could I explain that for months? Disconnect wasn't just an internet setting. It was my small, secret rebellion. Days turned into weeks. I got a part-time job at a local cafe. It wasn't glamorous. Long hours. The smell of espresso clinging to my clothes. But it was mine. The customers came and went, faces blurring together, but I liked it. There was a rhythm to it, a peace in the routine. One evening, after closing, I stayed behind to mop the floor. The soft hum of the fridge, the flicker of the streetlights through the window. It was almost meditative. My co-worker, a college kid named Jamie, asked, "You okay? You've been smiling at the mop for 10 minutes. I laughed. "Yeah, I'm good. Just remembering. Good memories." "Better now," I said. He shrugged. "Cool. Want to grab pizza after?" I hesitated. The old me would have said no immediately. But this version of me, the one who had learned how to disconnect and start over. "Sure," I said, and that was how it began. The slow, careful return to life. A few months later, I went back to my old apartment to pick up the last of my things. He wasn't there. The key still fit, though the door creaked like it had aged years in my absence. Inside, everything looked smaller. The walls bare. The air stale. The console still sat under the TV, unplugged this time. Cables coiled like abandoned snakes. On the coffee table was a note. Not long, not sentimental. Just one line in his slanted handwriting. "Guess you won. Hope you're happy." I read it twice, then folded it neatly and tucked it into my pocket. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because I didn't want to leave a single piece of myself behind. Before leaving, I stood in front of the router one last time. Its little light blinked steadily. Loyal as ever, I pressed the power button. The light went out. No more blinking. No more signals. No more connections. It felt symbolic. The final disconnect. Then I turned and walked out, locking the door behind me. That night, I sat in my sister's kitchen, sipping tea while her kids argued over cereal. She looked at me and said, "You look lighter." "I feel lighter," I said. "Good," she smiled. "You deserve that." I nodded. "Yeah, I think I finally do." Months later, when people asked about that relationship, I didn't tell them the full story. I didn't mention the names, the arguments, or the endless cycle of being called things I didn't deserve. I just said, he taught me how powerful silence can be. And sometimes, when I'd hear someone complaining about their Wi-Fi dropping or their game disconnecting, I'd smile quietly to myself. They'd never know why. One evening, I walked home after a long shift. The streetlights shimmered against the wet pavement. Somewhere nearby, laughter spilled out from a cafe. I pulled my jacket tighter and smiled. There's a strange kind of peace in realizing you don't need to prove anything anymore. Not your worth, not your anger, not even your revenge. The petty part of me had long since stopped giggling about those disconnects. Now, it felt like something else entirely. A small poetic reminder that control was never his to begin with. It was always mine. Weeks later, I got a message from an unknown number. "Hey, just wanted to say I sold the PlayStation. Moving on, I guess. No apology. No explanation. Just that." I stared at it for a long second, then typed a reply. "Good. You should." Then I blocked the number. Not out of spite, but out of peace, because I didn't need to hear from him again. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something beautiful. For so long, I'd thought revenge was about making someone else suffer, showing them what they did to you. But real revenge, it's quieter, it's living well, it's smiling again, it's finally being free enough to forget their name. And as I drifted off to sleep, my phone buzzed softly on the nightstand. Connected, steady, glowing. For the first time in years, I didn't need to touch it because the only connection that mattered was the one I'd rebuilt with myself